Well, finally got Lori behind the camera, which is actually just an old beat up iPhone SE. Like I have mentioned before, I'm not going through any efforts of making a super slick video. We don't even know if we're going to even post these or continue with this channel. But I was doing a video yesterday on the MacBook Air video app. It turned out to be disastrous, and so I just trashed it. But while I was talking about how you'd build, how you'd come out here and how we started, being able to live dirt cheap comfortably, Lori started chiming in about how certain things weren't possible anymore. We bought some 1,500-gallon poly water tanks. The first one was $900. Lori and I got married 10 years ago, so I bought an extra one thinking, another person would need extra water. So I bought another one, and it was $1,200. Ironically enough, I bought the extra 1,500 gallons because of Lori moving in, and it turns out that with Lori managing the place, we use less water than we did when I was just here alone, so the tank really wasn't all that necessary. But she brought up a really good point, and that was that try to find a 1,500-gallon poly water tank. They're either totally backlogged or you can't find them in stock. And now I think they're around $2,000 or more. And so she made an interesting point. I thought I could do a little YouTube channel on how to live dirt cheap comfortably. But I'll tell you what, we're doing it. But I've been doing it for close to 74 years. Lori's been doing it for the last 10 years. It's not getting that, it's not getting easy anymore. It's almost not even getting possible. We live in a culture that's going through a gigantic paradigm shift globally, not just in America, where the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, the old proverbial saying. But basically it's that as a society develops or creates or whatever, craps out more and more multi-billionaires, the consequences are there's more and more poor people living way below the poverty level. And you don't need this video or me or anybody else telling you. Just look at the news and see all the homeless on the streets in tents and under overpasses and in old beat up motorhomes and everything else. 50 years ago, 40 years ago, we didn't have that. Now, historically, it's not uncommon. It was commonplace during the Dust Bowl with the poor Oklahomans leaving Oklahoma, trying to come out to California to find work for their families. A lot of hobo camps and that kind of thing. But it became a thing of the past after a while, the 50s, 60s, 70s. And now all of a sudden we're back at it again. And there is solutions for the homelessness. Other countries have done it. I'll bring that up sometime. It might be Norway has resolved it very, very easily. But the thing you got to realize when you're poor, or if you have limited income and you can't live conventionally, is that the rich really don't want to see you. People that have things don't want to be around people that don't have things. Now you can get into a whole philosophical reason of why. Do they feel guilty or whatever? They don't want to catch your poverty disease. Who the hell knows? But you've got to keep that in mind when you're trying to live comfortably without a lot of money. back in the 60s, I was really, really, really poor. And rather than living on the street, I was going to school in Long Beach on a scholarship, Long Beach State University. I didn't like the idea of living on the sidewalk or in the streets or the tents, and that wasn't even commonplace back then. Well, I happened to be down in the slums of Long Beach, and I found a for rent sign on an old wooden garage along a row of wooden garages underneath some tenement apartment buildings. $6 a month, and I had $6, so I rented it. I went around the alleyways and with an old shopping cart and picked up a chair and a table and all kinds of things that were thrown out. And after a short period of time, I had a comfortable little home. No hassles. The neighbors knew I was there, but they didn't care. They were poor. The poor kind of live and let live, as opposed to the rich. And the police didn't know I was there because it looked like a garage. I wasn't violating. I was violating all kinds of probably health codes. You're not supposed to live in a garage, but $6 a month. But at any rate, the point being is it's getting harder and harder. And so what you're finding on YouTube is van life, nomadic life. People are living in vans and living in motorhomes full time. Now, back in the 80s, I had a restaurant, and I had a lot of the old hippies that lived in their campers and their vans coming in for coffee. They'd sit all day and drink coffee for $1 or whatever the price was back then. Well, I'd been in a similar situation many moons ago, and so they weren't causing any trouble. So I had a big, long table that sat about 8 people and had my regulars and let them hang out all day for the price of a cup of coffee. And they could sit and doodle and draw and read and talk. They were good friends. I gave them a place to come to. And they're the ones that told me, well, I said, well, where are you guys staying? Oh, we live in that old motorhome, and we camp out, along Pacific Coast Highway 1 outside of Santa Cruz. Well, that got shut down. And part of the reasons a lot of that stuff gets shut down is because the people trash the place. And now I've seen some homeless encampments in San Francisco. There's a great one. I believe the lady's name is Kirsten Dirksen. Excellent, excellent video channel where she interviews some street people, homeless people living on the streets of San Francisco. No drug addicts, no alcoholics. Really a cool group of people living in some really neat little ramshackle places along the sidewalk. And very clean, very together, very organized. And so it can be done. But for the most part, you're going to get hassled. And if you're living in a van, you're going to get hassled. And I'm all for tiny places and tiny homes. I've been living in, this place is 240 square feet. I've been living in small places for over 50 years because I like the efficiency of it. But let me explain something to you about this rage of tiny houses. There's a philosophy that goes with it, and Lori will scan this place. It works. This place is plenty big for 2 people and a small dog if you don't have a lot of junk. We've got more junk around really than normally, but I would normally have, but it's wide open spaces. We're not banging each other. It is not that fun to live in some of these tiny houses that I see people building, and I think eventually they're going to get really tired of it. The same with living in a van. I lived in a little 21-foot Class C motorhome. Very comfortable because it took me a year to find one that was really laid out for full-time living. And it was comfortable enough, but the trouble with that is it had a motor, and motors need maintenance. And that's what led me to building Hermit's Rest here. But you got to bear in mind that A, it's not as easy as it was 27 years ago when I found an acre and a half for $4,500, $100 down, $75 a month, and with no financing credit checks or any of that. That's becoming harder and harder to find. And then when you do, and you establish a place like this, you're very easily going to have the county on you. Now, we're 90 miles from any form of real civilization, and the county seat is 90 miles away. But when I came out here, there were people there were a few people around living in tents and all that, and the county came out and chased them all off. And so you'd think, well, you're on an acre and a half out in the middle of nowhere. You've seen enough of the video to see that, it's pretty much open woods. So, what's the problem with, codes and that kind of thing? I'm a retired medical engineer, but I did structural engineering, and I can appreciate codes, and I build houses, and a lot of them make sense, but it was a known fact, back then, that most of it was for consumer goods. You could build much cheaper and just as sturdy with less requirements, but you wouldn't be spending as much money, therefore keeping the building material industry going. But at any rate, you'd think out here, what would it really matter? Well, the old saying is that if you sold the place and somebody got hurt, the county would be responsible. Everybody's worried about liability. And so the bottom line is it's getting harder and harder. Now, ironically enough, I managed to get this place county approved, and I'll tell you why. Because all it would take is somebody buying a lot down the road and building a house and investing $30, $40, $60, $100,000 and having a good income or being rich because they sold their $1 million home in California and they came out here and bought an acre for 10 grand, built a house for 80 grand, and still have plenty of cash left over. And I've watched many of them move into this area. They're going to come down and look at Hermit's Rest and say, oh, what's he doing? And they're going to call the county. Well, I'm county approved. There was a window opening where the county would approve, a put together structure like this, consisting of an old travel trailer covered in concrete and my room addition, if I had proper sanitation. And so what I did is I designed a small septic system for sink water, which was the requirement, and then a composting waste disposal system. Called up the county, and ironically enough, I was talking to the guy about what I had and was asking him some questions. And he said, well, I'll prove what you have. And he came out and I showed it to him and filled out the forms and the paperwork, paid the permit, and got it approved. So I can stay put. I don't have to travel around. We're not hiding from anybody. We're established. It's getting harder and harder, like Lori said. Maybe I'll get into it more. I don't even know if I'm going to post this one. I've been rambling. Anyway, enough for now. Take it easy.